Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dev Life podcast. I am Brooke, and that is my very good friend Matt. Hello, Matt.
Hey everybody.
And we are joined today by Angular team member Ben Hong. So, hello, Ben.
Hello.
Now we're here, well, I should say Ben is here to talk to us about documentation. And honestly, like before you run away because I just said the D word, like don't. Ben is he's specifically on the Angular team for documentation. And then on top of that, he's also a member of the Vue core team. He's an ambassador for Nuxt.js. And I mean, he just has an extensive background and lots of experience with documentation. So you're going to get a treat today. I really believe that this is going to be not your typical, why should we do documentation? How do we do that? Like, this is going to really be an elevated experience of more of the nitty-gritty. And you would be wrong if you said that we're not going to bring in AI. We are definitely doing that. So,
Oh yeah.
should be a good conversation. But, Ben, why don't we have you introduce yourself a bit before we really dive into stuff?
Yeah. So you've talked a little bit about my open source experience. So as you might be able to guess, I'm very much a child of the web. So growing up, kind of my first programming language was basically an O'Reilly book that had HTML in it. I tried Java, I tried like what was it at the time? Visual Basics, that's what it was. Dragging the stuff around. But the web just really got its got its hook in me, and so I was doing HTML and CSS for hosting sites. For some of you might remember like GeoCities, AngelFire, blogging platforms like Zynga, LiveJournal, and then like little gaming sites like Neopets. And that's kind of where I got sort of my first experience to coding. But funny enough, at the time, I never even realized that could be a web like a career. And so that kind of fell to the wayside. And my background is actually I went to study psychology and got a master's in industrial organizational psychology, which is a little bit of a mouthful. We shorten it to IO psychology. But most people don't know what the IO means. So that's why I usually say the whole thing. But yeah, so basically from there, I kind of wanted to be what they call like a human factor specialist, which is essentially user experience as most people know it today. But back then, to really get into user experience, you kind of had to also be a graphic designer. And let's just say I can play one on TV, but graphic design is not exactly my forte. So that's when I kind of picked up. I kind of remember like, oh, I did really like coding. And so I was like, how do I kind of pair the UX side of my skill set with uh, basically the technical side? And at the time, it was still kind of like this murky territory of how you blend the two. And so since then, it's kind of been like emerging. I think nowadays they really call it developer experience. And so where you get to do the technical side, but you also think about the user experience side of things. And then obviously there's different specialties within it. But that's kind of where, yeah, my background a little bit how I got into things.
Cool.
Wow, awesome background. So another thing we've been wanting to ask you is we've heard about your marathon running and that you recently ran your second marathon.
That
So
is
tell us a
true.
little bit more about that experience, like the prep
Gosh.
and run and everything.
Yeah, it's
Stop you.
funny. On social media, everyone's talking about like, when you hit like your 30s, like everyone falls into like one of four camps, and one of them's like long distance running. And I hate that I fall into one of those. I was like, gosh, they have me pegged. It was one of those, I don't know, you can call it like a, third year. I don't want to say a quarter life crisis. I don't know. But basically, I think for me, it was like post-pandemic, and I was looking for a bit of a change of pace. And one of the things I had been looking to kind of always been kind of looking into philosophy was almost like a second major of mine, and I was always looking into like mental fortitude and what it meant to train that. And so I usually like to use the proverbial like when you're watching a superhero movie, right? And the end, they're like beaten up, they're down, and you're like, get up, get up. You want them to get up and keep fighting. And I always wondering like, would I be able to get up in that situation, right? When like life has kicked me down, chips are off the table. What would I do? And I think I realized that like the way to test that in an odd way was running, because I don't love running to begin with. And running is one of those things where like you can quit at any time and no one's gonna stop you, right? And so I got it in my head basically at one point that I was like, yeah, I'm gonna try this long distance thing because it's one of those things where you just have to keep pushing yourself. And no joke, I mean, you say running, but I walked a good chunk of it. I think my marathon time is it's not impressive. It's like 6 hours some. And so but I can tell you it's ironic because it's the fast runners, they're done in like 3, 4 hours, and it's the 6, 7, 8 hour people that are like dragging on in the sun, and it's a special kind of mental fortitude that you need to when you see like 80-year-old grandpas passing you, and you're just
Yes,
like,
Oh,
keep
yes.
going,
wow.
keep going, don't quit. But yeah, so anyways, but yeah, so yeah, so it's two, and I think I might be taking a break for a while, but I'm in my pickleball era now, for those who don't know, but
Oh, good.
otherwise, yeah.
I'm so glad to hear
Oh,
you say that about the old people though, because I've run some like 5 and 10Ks, and there's been
Yeah.
times when like these old men will run by, and I'm like, oh my gosh. But
Yeah, you're just like, oh my Lord.
yeah,
I should give up now.
a little
Pick me
bloated.
up.
Yeah.
well, the bad news is that also happens in pickleball.
Oh
Like,
Yes.
no.
Oh yeah, that's the funny thing too. Yep. Yep, it certainly does. That it does.
Now,
that is awesome. I also love pickleball, and I play pretty regularly. It's
Oh,
fun.
we definitely need to nerd out about that later.
Yeah, so cool.
well, okay, so here's a slight plug because
Yeah.
you and I are actually part of the GDG program. And
Oh.
we do we're organizing a brand new chapter of the GDG Salt Lake City. And so with that is putting on, if you choose, if you want to do a DevFest conference. And so we're going to do that. We're going to have one here in Salt Lake on October 11th. And Ben, if you want to come and speak or even be like, you know what, I'm looking for a really good MC.
Yeah.
If you want to come
Okay.
do that, we would love that because you would definitely be a good MC. But then you can play pickleball. That's my
Amazing.
roundabout invitation for that.
Love it. Yeah, let's chat more about that after, for sure.
Okay, do.
Awesome. So yeah, let's get into the I guess meat of the podcast today. So uh, let's start with Ben. Maybe you could give us the definition of what exactly documentation is and what it isn't.
Gosh, that's a big ask. I'm not gonna do the whole Webster's dictionary defines documentation. I think, in a raw way for me, documentation really is about helping developers navigate a code base, and at least we're talking about like software, right? If we're talking about like the really broad term, it's really just helping users navigate something they're unfamiliar with, and being able to answer the questions and basically you're anticipating the questions they'll have for workflows, rather than them having to obviously have like a subject matter expert on hand. That's really what your documentation ultimately is. It's your
Yeah,
customer support, right? Is what it
and
is.
I think it's important that you asked that though, like, is it just software development or not? Because
Yeah.
a lot of what I do would be like the documentation for onboarding or
Hmm.
accessibility, and those still do, I think, encompass that developer experience,
Yeah.
but it's not strictly just for the code. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
For
But
And
sure.
so I know there's so many places could go with this, but like immediately as you said that, I am thinking about how I wish we had more of that at my company. Like I have spent like a day and a half trying to understand parts of our database that if someone just wrote
Yeah.
down, I could have done it in an hour, you know?
Yep. Hmm.
well, okay, so then Ben, I'm sure you get this all the time, and it's exactly why I said at the beginning, it's the D word, right? Like everybody
Yeah.
hears that and they kind of turn around running. Nobody wants to write documentation. So, what in your experience have you found has actually been a game changer? Like, what actually is that change agent to get someone to be motivated and want to make documentation?
Yeah, I think the big thing with documentation is that it is this like big impending thing, like kind of like it's like the whole testing, right? You should write tests. I think for documentation, I like to tell people it's really you're just taking notes,
Yeah.
right? You can make a footnote. I think when you say someone should write documentation, this may be in part due to like many of us going through like primary schooling. It feels like a book report that you have to
Mm.
submit that's going to be graded. It needs to be got footnotes, it's got citations, like it feels like this huge thing you got to do. When a lot of times, to Matt's point, like someone knowing something about how the schema of the database works, if they had just made a sentence or two about it, could probably go a really long way for someone else trying to navigate it. But instead, we chalk it up to this huge like I gotta write a novel about like why decisions were made. And like that's nice. Like sure, like for those who love doing that, I still think more power to you. But most people, if they just wrote a sentence or two, it would be they're surprised. They would be surprised at how much it would help people. Just the little tidbits.
So helping him break down that like it doesn't have to be a novel misconception.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Absolutely.
Hmm. Is it something you feel like anyone should be writing? Should developers just be writing out documentation anytime they think of it? Or like, how would you recommend a developer goes about uh, improving their documentation skills, I guess?
Yeah, it's funny. I think, and I know we'll dovetail this into some point, but it's funny, especially with the AI conversation. I'm a big fan of what like a mentor of mine used to call documentation driven development. And it's this idea that really, I mean, isn't that what we ultimately should be doing, right? Like that's why they say when you're like kind of before you code, you're supposed to do like pseudocode, right? Figure out kind of what you expect, what the API might look like, how you expect people to use it. I mean, even that sketch alone, if you did nothing else and more or less, like, obviously you clean it up when you get to the final API design of whatever you're building, that itself is the documentation, right? Rather than just like staring at a screen and then only putting out whatever you think will work. If you just simply broke it down, I mean, that goes a long way because especially when we're talking about, and we'll talk about it later with AI, like it'll ingest that context of like, yeah, this API was designed for these kind of users with these kind of requests with this sort of, whatever, performance load, etc. And then like that's just critical context that will just be missing by the time someone receives, the API on the other end of the spectrum.
Hmm. Okay. Now, I'm going to change directions here a little bit because, like, as you're talking, I'm starting to really wonder, a lot of what we've already talked about so far is internal documentation.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of open source. So we've mentioned Angular, we've mentioned Next. Like, how does that differ in your experience from that internal documentation, or is it all largely the same?
Um, there certainly is a difference, when you're doing internal documentation, right? Within like an intranet, within a team, there is a lot of call it like assumed language or tech stack that you can just assume people understand. Whereas I think when you have open source projects like Angular, Vue, and Next, you kind of don't know where people are coming from. So you kind of have to expect a bit more of a blank slate.
Okay.
And as a result, is why we try to write the docs in such a way that like we're very clear about the context or prerequisites you have coming into it, right? That like for example, Angular documentation, you really do need to have a better fundamental of TypeScript, right? Because that's basically how all the examples are written. Whereas on the Vue side, for example, TypeScript is not as upfront, right, for the prerequisite. And so setting people up for success just has you just have different onboarding procedures, right, with that when you're kind of approaching internal docs versus open source where truly anyone can get into it. And of course, there are even language things, especially with, I would say, open source that I learned as well through one of my mentors is that, especially with open source, you don't know if their first language is going to be English. And
Oh,
you could technically say that's true of like internal docs too, because I know we have contractors that, especially if you're hiring third party outside of the US, but open source in particular, I remember writing some docs and they mentioned things like, that analogy they might not understand, right? Because it's a metaphor. You'll think, oh yeah, sure. It's like you'll
right.
bring it could be a reference to a TV show or something that you just assume that's common knowledge, but you can't assume that's common knowledge, especially in open source documentation. Um, and so, I mean, these are general principles that uh, tend to happen, especially with these bigger documentation projects. But anyways, that's like a little tidbit of how things differ between internal versus
Yeah.
external docs.
Hmm. Very cool. So, kind of as a follow-up to Brooke's question, I'm curious, as an Angular and Vue core team member, would you say there are differences in documentation across frameworks?
That's a good question. I would say having worked in both Vue and Angular, I mean honestly, I think the goals are both the same in the sense that like both of the web frameworks are looking for ways to basically enable developers to build the best applications they can, right? The most powerful ones they can using proven patterns in a way that's, kind of like the core teams recommend, right? So that they're not using techniques or internal APIs they shouldn't be, so that when the, versions upgrade, they have foot guns and all those sort of things. That's really the kind of the main goal. Um, And I think as far as like, I think part of that question, right, is like the differences between the two. And so I would say one of the interesting things, and this is, it's not like a pro or con, it's differences, is that Vue is obviously a very purely, we'll say like a community-based project, right? There's no real corporation backing it, right? Evan recently started Void Zero with his startup, but that's still separate from the Vue like framework itself, right? Angular, one of its most powerful and selling points is always that like they have internal customers at Google that use it, right? It's like it's supported by a big company. And so as a result, then you have different priorities, I think, with the teams. And they kind of weigh the two. And it's again, it's not a not a good or bad thing. It's just different trade-offs that the teams have to make as a result of sort of answering to different stakeholders.
Mm,
Okay. One
great
thing
answer.
you were kind of mentioning too, like with the language barrier, it made me
Yeah.
think AI instantly. So let's do bring that up now, because
Yeah,
one
please.
thought was, how easy is it just to use AI to say, okay, here's what I have. Can you translate that into something a Spanish user would be
Yeah.
able, or French or whatever? But, like what is the role that you've seen with AI playing in documentation so far?
Yeah. So far, my experience with AI, what I've seen mostly is developers kind of just throwing the book at AI. Like they'll throw everything at it and be like, just write me the docs for X feature. And as for those of us who've done it a lot, it writes very, it's like 60 to 70% there, right? It gets like a good chunk of the things right, and it feels really good. But the problem is that the remaining 30, 40%, right? This is where documentation is so critical, is because the edge cases are usually where people are get stuck. It's
Hmm.
not the major use cases. And more importantly, as we know, AI has a tendency to hallucinate. And it's getting better with being able to reference things. But I've seen it still like it'll just ignore directions you give it, right? That like, hey, by the way, all the components that we have, like we're in Angular V20, do not mark components as standalone. And then it'll generate a
Mm.
guide and I'll see example code with like standalone flag marked, like explicitly called out, even though that's now default now. There's no reason to call standalone true. Um, but
Mhm.
it's one of those, I don't know if it's, I think contradictory is the wrong word, but it's one of those things where like you need to know what you're looking for before you find it, kind of thing. Um, when the AI is wrong, it is super wrong, but it sounds so good
Yeah.
in the way that it
Right?
Yeah.
delivers that message. And with documentation, that's really scary because a lot of time with users when they go on documentation, I mean, there's a reason why documentation in general has such a bad reputation is because a lot of people have been burned by bad documentation and leading them down a rabbit hole that doesn't make any sense. And then they're like, screw it, I'm just gonna trust Stack Overflow, I trust Reddit. Like at least before, those were people. Those were real people you were talking to. And nowadays we're in a weird place now where some of those forums are being filled with AI answers too. And
Hmm.
so we're in like a weird circular dependency now. And it's I think I lost my train of thought a little bit, but it will, I'm sure we'll tease this apart more, but it is a very interesting time with AI and documentation for sure.
I think Matt's been learning a lot with AI because we've been doing a talk. It's like an AI code off. So what have you kind of been learning with the hallucinations with that, Matt?
Oh, yeah, no, similar thing. I mean, we've been using Cursor, bringing in models. They all hallucinate in different ways. Um,
It's so funny.
in different frameworks, some hallucinate more than others.
Yes. That
But
is true.
for documentation, one thing that did get me thinking about is, yeah, I've had at times where I've had in code documentation, and
Hmm.
I prompt AI to do something for me, and it
Yeah.
reads the documentation in the code and says, "Okay, let's do this too." And I'm like, "No, wait, I don't want you to go change things based off a to-do comment right now, you know?"
Yeah. Yep.
But I guess
Absolutely.
that leads in good into a question like where do you see AI best fitting into the developer documentation process? Like how do we do it?
Yeah, that is a great question. I'm really excited to talk about. This was one of the ones I was really excited to talk about with y'all. I think the key for developers, and it's a friend of mine and I were talking, and I love that Microsoft named their agent, or like I know it's not their agent, but like their tool Copilot. Because that's what AI is. It's there to assist you with documentation and the tooling and the coding, rather than just it generates the documentation for you. I think when you let AI take the lead on the documentation, that's where it gets dangerous. Because one, you don't know what style it's going to be headed in. You don't know what sort of like teaching styles, language faux pas. There's so many things that go into documentation because one of the things we didn't get to talk about, but like documentation in another form is a form of teaching, really. You're teaching people how to do something. And so with that, having an education background, studying how people acquire information, how it sticks, and more importantly, how not to discourage users. So one of the common mistakes people make in documentation all the time is that this example is, or like using this API, this is a simple example of how to do X. Simple is a very subjective thing.
Right.
It's nothing could be more frustrating than being told it's supposed to be very simple and then realizing, and sometimes it's not even your fault. Sometimes the example is just straight up broken, but it says it's really simple. Um,
Then you feel dumb, and then you're
yeah. And then you're kind of discouraged. You're like, well, okay, I guess it's not simple for me. So maybe, and so I know that people are using AI to try to tease it apart to help them learn. And that is great. But that's why I like this idea of a co-pilot. And so to get to the question regarding documentation, I think it's really helpful at filling in the gaps where you might struggle with otherwise. So a perfect example of this is when you're working with a lot of like legacy code. So for example, I've done this as well with the Angular code because I'm obviously coming into Angular where it's like V8. I think I came in around V18-ish. And obviously a lot has happened since, between 1 and 18. And there's a lot of context in there. But if I were to try to go through the source code and read all of it and grok all of it, right, to understand all of it, that would take me forever, let alone if I'm going to be able to follow it properly, because there's a lot of legacy decisions that even some team members won't even be able to really explain to me anymore. But what's nice about what I've done is I've actually had AI ingest the code base and then actually help tease apart some of the source code for me. And that's the kind of thing where it can really speed up your understanding, because rather than having to sit there and go line by line, if you don't have like the core team member there to explain something to you, the AI is a lot better at helping to at least show files where like, oh, this is where I believe like the router API is defined. And you can go in there and validate that, right? Because at that point, you're pointing at source code. You're not saying, come up with the router API and tell me magically what it is. You can go into source and literally double check it. And that's where I do think AI is very powerful for helping people write docs, because it can kind of help you navigate some of those. Because, sometimes when we want to ask people questions, we don't want to ask the so-called dumb questions, right? We're like, this has got to be like, there's a file in here that probably explains this, but I have no idea where it is.
Hmm.
AI is very good at locating that kind of stuff for you.
okay.
Um, so I'd say that's like my first part of my answer for that.
It makes me curious though. I mean, AI is all the buzz right now. Everybody's
Of course.
talking about it. But that aside, are there other tools or platforms or resources that you would recommend that maybe people haven't really thought to use or don't think of using very often when it comes to writing documentation?
Yeah, I would say when it comes to documentation, and this is one of the things I was saying where I wonder, not sure quite sure what the term is, but like having the expertise to understand the direction you want your docs to go, right? It's almost like I call it like when you're creating art and you need like a specific vision. There's like, in order to have, I guess, when they say to acquire taste in art, it's not something that's like really tangible, right? When art piece looks good or bad, like when people are evaluating it, documentation surprisingly has a similar quality, because when you read docs, there is a quality that comes with kind of its ease of understanding, because you have to choose the right examples. You can't just be like,
Right.
anyone can create a counter example, to do example, but to create a narrative, and that's actually part of it. Documentation is about a bit of storytelling
Yep.
and getting the users to the end result, and hopefully in a way that's actually quite a pleasant journey and not one that's like a slog. And so that's why, like, when we think of documentation as that, like studying writers, studying teachers, there's a great, it's a lot of different paths that kind of add up into documentation, I think is what I'm trying to say. And so learning to learn from those different fields. I'm a big fan of like innovation tends to come from different areas of different walks of life. And then it's old in other fields, but when you bring it into like your field, all of a sudden it seems like this new thing. Documentation is a bit like that as well. And so, for example, one of the things um, that I did as well, I've taken different writing classes for storytelling, for prose, world building as well. You'd be surprised how that kind of plays into the technical world when you're starting to think about how you want to construct the narrative around the concepts you're explaining to people.
See, I love that. Now, I do have a background in teaching, and so you're hitting like it's making me think of things back when I was a teacher,
Yeah.
and one of those was definitely stories, and it's why a lot of math is taught with, problem solving, and they always have
Hmm.
those little stories and narratives, like you're saying.
Yeah.
But also, it's called a schema. You're tapping into someone's
Yeah.
background knowledge from their past, their schema.
Hmm.
And when you can do that, that's one of the best ways to really draw someone in to your writing because all
Yeah.
of a sudden it relates to them and they go, "Oh, yeah," like they were, they're drawn into that kind of memory or that even nostalgia in some cases. So I think those are really important things you're bringing up. And then also I've noticed a lot of developers just jump right in. Like they'll just start spewing out the details or the information, but just even one sentence of background context into why the document's being written or what it's for goes miles. So, and like you said earlier, it doesn't have to be a novel, it doesn't have to be some huge paragraph, but
Yeah.
even just that short, this document is for blah blah blah, that helps so much. Yeah, you're bringing up great points.
Oh
Something
yeah.
that, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, like I love that. Like it just comes to mind a time I was reading a documentation for an important process, and it told you like, hey, if this and this one goes wrong as part of a deployment, then do this immediately. And then it doesn't tell you how to do it. And I'm like,
Oh
oh man,
no.
like so I added the documentation and linked that to the other document that told you how to do it. And
Oh, that's
but
horrible.
um but I that was like that's my biggest pet peeve, I guess, as an engineer is when people make assumptions like that. You know, they assume that you
Yeah.
just know the other document or what they're talking about. But I'm curious what your biggest documentation pet peeve is and that you wish teams would address more.
Um, I think for this one, I think the best one analogy to use for this one is if anyone's played board games before, there are it's funny the way people onboard you into board games, there's kind of a few different approaches. And one of the ones I've seen constantly done, which is relates to documentation, is they'll try to explain the entire rule book to a new player, like right up front, right? It'll be like turn one, you're supposed to do this. And then, by the way, if you accidentally hit this bottle does this other thing. But if the bottle is upside down, you have to remember that it does this other thing. And
Uh,
it's so convoluted for a new player. They're like, and you can tell they're just like glazed over. When a lot of times, a lot of games, it's really just like, what are the essential bits they need to know to get from beginning to end for like the most common scenarios? And then once they're comfortable, they can branch into the edge cases. I think documentation is a lot like that as well. When you're getting started, you need to get them comfortable in the context in which they're getting, like, get them to the point of success as quickly as possible. Once you get them to that point, they feel like they're like, oh, okay, got it, cool. Like I learned how to move my piece. I've learned how to like access my auth token. Cool. What's next? Instead of like
mm,
all the edge cases of like, but oh, if you're doing this, and then like, trust me, when they need the edge case, they'll reach for it. But for now, you need to get them comfortable. And so with documentation, there is this kind of like, oh, I need to tell you everything in every edge case. Like that's not it. I think, and that's also partly back circling back to our original discussion, why I think a lot of people feel like documentation is it's almost like they're writing a legal contract and they're afraid if they miss like the one clause, they'll be
mm,
liable for like
Yeah.
every mistake everyone makes. And that's just not the case. Like we write code, it's buggy, and then we write bug fixes, right? And documentation similarly. We write the 80% use case, and then it's the whole Pareto effect, right? You want what 20% of your what 80% of your use case is covered by like 20% of your documentation. This is kind of how it works.
mhm,
And so as a result, like I think what I was basically saying is that take it in chunks. Don't try to explain everything at once. And then as edge cases come in, right, people forget like, oh yeah, the schema in that one place, like don't put like a null value there, whatever. Then like, cool, document it when that comes across, but don't feel like you have to account for it all at once. Um, and again, I know engineers are most susceptible to this because it's that whole what is it called? The where you like you can't like when you're designing an API, you try to come up with every single edge case possible.
Hmm.
I forgot there was a term for it. I'm blanking on but you all know what I'm talking about. And so, there's like, yeah, come up with the major ones that users are going to use, and then, when the time comes, you'll deal with the rest. Um,
It's interesting to me too because that is so much of what engineers do. Like
yeah,
you don't build something start to finish in one go. I mean, there's so many iterations on that, and usually
yeah,
it's what everyone says when especially when you're first learning, is break it down into the smallest steps possible. But
yeah,
if we approach documentation in that same way, it's like, well, I don't need to have a full library right now. What's the first step that we need most critically? What's the
yeah.
highest priority document? And then just like make a list of what needs to happen in that priority list. And I think that helps. But just think of it like that. Think of it like coding. It is iterative. It's
Yeah.
going to be a process over time. It doesn't need to all be done right now, today. But
And to be fair to my fellow engineers out there, I know part of the problem is that sometimes the documentation just gets lost in external tooling, right? It's
right.
in
Hmm.
Jira, it's in Confluence, it's in whatever. And so, for those that do have those systems, the more you can automate those to get those inside so that those links aren't lost, or that, if you can't get the docs to just be markdown files inside of your code base, it'll just go a long way because I know that people are trying their best, and obviously we all have limited time. So,
Right. Yeah. Okay, so all that kind of in mind then, like what is, for anybody who's really wanting to level up their documentation skills, be they junior, intermediate, advanced, doesn't matter,
yeah.
what's something you would say that they can start doing now to help really level up that skill with documentation?
I would say the easiest way, following my own principle of like having success, right? And not just like saying, "Oh, go submit a PR to the Angular repo or whatever." Because I know that contributing to open source has its obstacles. I think those who want to get better at documentation, really, I hope like you should start a blog. You should be writing about your own experience and trying to explain the things that you've learned. And that'll give you a lot of practice because whether it's tutorials, whether it's like things that you're retrospecting on because you did something different on a database that you didn't expect, or you're learning iOS as a web engineer, like what I'm doing, and then you're noticing different things. Those will go a long way to getting you to start also thinking from the audience's perspective. Because that actually is another challenge with documentation, right? Is because a lot of times it's that phenomena where you already know so much that you kind of forget what the students don't know. Again, I'm blanking on the concept for that, but it's a common problem. And so really finding empathy with, again, if you think of the readers of your docs as students, find empathy with your students. That's what they really do want to learn. That's why they're there. That's why they're spending their time to read your docs. I assure you they're not there because they don't have better things to do. They want to learn. They want to get to the information. And so the more you can find ways to empathize with things the questions they might have, and finding ways to explain it in a way that best fits like the narrative they're looking for, the better you'll get at documentation. Because that's really all it ultimately is at the end of the day, is finding ways to get people to where they want to go.
Love that.
I love that, yeah, putting yourself in their shoes. And
Yeah.
I loved your board game analogy too. It's like learn how to give board game instructions and then
Yeah, like imagine trying to teach them a tic-tac-toe and you're like, don't go there because it's a double trap. Like they'll learn the double trap. Like let them play, let them figure it
Yeah.
out. Like that's part of the process, you know?
Yeah, that is absolute gold. Thank you so much, Ben. So we have one last question for you.
Yeah,
Since we
shoot.
are the Dev Life podcast, what is something you do to keep and maintain your ultimate dev life?
Ooh, good question. I think I'm gonna quote Ted Lasso on this one, and don't worry, it's not a spoiler for anyone. But I would say it's staying curious. I'm really big on, I mean, if we think about our industry, really, it is about finding ways to innovate and make people's lives better. And the best way to do that is to just keep learning, learning from different realms. And so the more you do that, the more you can bring that learning into, the tech industry. And I think you'll gain some really interesting perspectives when you do so. And that's what I'm constantly doing. Like I'm not in hardware, but I love learning about like, and for those who are watching, I have my Vision Pro here, and I've been playing around with that. It's fascinating to see kind of where tech is going. And then reading sci-fi, like just it's fascinating what you'll learn as if you just step outside the realm a bit and find ways to bring it back in.
Isn't that funny how reading something totally unrelated and almost random can be what sparks that
Yeah.
aha moment.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, super great advice. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for being on the show today. For everyone listening and watching, you can follow and find him on Blue Sky uh, at bencodezen.io or on YouTube or his channel Ben Code Zen. But how about you? What are your thoughts, insights, and suggestions about documentations as a software engineer? Post all your questions and thoughts in the comments below, and then be sure to like and subscribe. Also, for anyone nearby, come join us in person at the Dev Fest in Salt Lake City on October 11th. More info to come, but gear up for a one-day four-track event, Back to the Future style in all sorts of 80s neon glory. And this is the Dev Live.
Yeah. Bye.